Peter, the man who denied Jesus 3 times. Some stories in the Bible do not begin with glory. They begin with tension, with a knot in the chest, with a moment we wish we could erase. Peter's story opens in that uncomfortable space, the place where love and fear collide. He is not introduced to us as a villain or a traitor, but as a man who genuinely loved Jesus and still failed him when it mattered most. And that is precisely why his story was to let us look away. Peter walked with Jesus. He heard his voice with his own ears. He watched blind eyes open and dead hearts come alive. He felt the authority in Jesus' words and believed, with all his strength, that he would never turn away. Yet on one cold night, surrounded by strangers in pressure and fear, Peter did the unthinkable. He denied even knowing the one he loved. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And in that moment, something in him shattered. This is not just Peter's story. It is ours. Because we know what it is like to mean well and still fall short. We know what it is like to speak boldly in safe spaces and then grow quiet when faith becomes costly. We know the weight of regret that comes when our actions contradict our devotion. Peter stands before us not as a distant biblical figure, but as a mirror held up to our own weakness. What makes this story unbearable is not the denial itself, but the look that followed. The Bible tells us that Jesus turned and looked at Peter. No accusation, no anger, just a look. A look that carried truth, sorrow, and love all at once. In that instant, Peter remembered everything Jesus had said. The rooster crowed, and Peter broke. He wept bitterly, not because he was caught, but because he realized how fragile his confidence really was. And yet the story does not end in that courtyard. It does not end with tears in the dark or a man walking away in shame. The denial was real, but it was not final. Peter's worst moment did not cancel his calling. His failure did not surprise Jesus, and it did not disqualify him from grace. That is the heartbeat of this message. If you carry the memory of moments you wish you could undo, this story is for you. If you have ever felt unworthy because of what you did when fear spoke louder than faith, stay here. Peter's story is not about how low a man can fall. It is about how far grace is willing to go. Some stories in the Bible do not begin with glory. They begin with tension, with a knot in the chest, with a moment we wish we could erase. Peter's story opens in that uncomfortable space, the place where love and fear collide. He is not introduced to us as a villain or a traitor, but as a man who genuinely loved Jesus and still failed him when it mattered most. And that is precisely why his story refuses to let us look away. Peter walked with Jesus. He heard his voice with his own ears. He watched blind eyes open and dead hearts come alive. He felt the authority in Jesus' words and believed with all his strength that he would never turn away. Yet on one cold night, surrounded by strangers in pressure and fear, Peter did the unthinkable. He denied even knowing the one he loved. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And in that moment, something in him shattered. This is not just Peter's story. It is ours. Because we know what it is like to mean well and still fall short. We know what it is like to speak boldly in safe spaces and then grow quiet when faith becomes costly. We know the weight of regret that comes when our actions contradict our devotion. Peter stands before us not as a distant biblical figure, but as a mirror held up to our own weakness. What makes this story unbearable is not the denial itself, but the look that followed. The Bible tells us that Jesus turned and looked at Peter. No accusation, no anger, just a look that carried truth, sorrow, and love all at once. In that instant, Peter remembered everything Jesus had said. The rooster crowed, and Peter broke. He wept bitterly, not because he was caught, but because he realized how fragile his confidence really was. And yet the story does not end in that courtyard. It does not end with tears in the dark or a man walking away in shame. The denial was real, but it was not final. Peter's worst moment did not cancel his calling. His failure did not surprise Jesus, and it did not disqualify him from grace. That is the heartbeat of this message. If you carry the memory of moments you wish you could undo, this story is for you. If you have ever felt unworthy because of what you did when fear spoke louder than faith, stay here. Peter's story is not about how low a man can fall. It is about how far grace is willing to go. Number 1. Peter the Bold, chosen before he was ready. Peter enters the story of Jesus not as a polished spiritual leader, but as a working man with rough edges and loud opinions. A fisherman by trade, his hands were shaped by nets and water, not by scrolls and synagogues. He was impulsive, outspoken, and often acted before thinking. And yet, when Jesus saw him, he did not see a liability. He saw a calling. Jesus looked at Simon and gave him a new name, Peter, meaning rock. That alone should stop us. Jesus named him not according to his present stability, but according to his future purpose. At that moment, Peter was anything but rock solid. He was inconsistent, emotional, and easily swayed by circumstances. Still, Jesus chose him, invited him close, and trusted him with access others did not have. Peter became part of Jesus' inner circle. He witnessed moments others never saw. The transfiguration, the raising of Jairus' daughter, the agony of Gethsemane. Peter was always there, always speaking, always reacting. Sometimes he said the right thing, like when he declared Jesus to be the Christ. Other times he said the wrong thing, like when he tried to correct Jesus about the cross. But through it all, Jesus never pushed him away. This matters, because many people believe God only uses the prepared, the disciplined, the spiritually mature. Peter destroys that assumption. He was chosen before he was ready, called before he was consistent, trusted before he was tested. Jesus did not wait for Peter to become strong. He walked with him while he was weak. If you feel unqualified, Peter's calling speaks directly to you. God is not intimidated by your roughness. He is not surprised by your flaws. He sees beyond your present condition and calls out what he intends to build. Peter's boldness was real, but it was not yet refined, and that boldness, unshaped by humility, was about to be tested. Number 2. I will never deny you. The danger of self-confidence without prayer. Peter's confidence was not fake. When he told Jesus he would never deny him, he meant every word. This was not arrogance in the sense of prideful rebellion. It was the confidence of someone who believed love alone would carry him through any trial. Peter truly thought his devotion was enough. But Jesus, knowing what was coming, warned him. Not harshly, not with condemnation, simply with truth. Jesus told Peter that before the rooster crowed, he would deny him 3 times. Peter responded the way many of us do when confronted with uncomfortable truth, by doubling down on his own strength. He insisted even more firmly that he would never fall away. This moment reveals a subtle but dangerous problem. Peter trusted his passion more than he trusted prayer. He believed intention would override pressure. He believed emotion would outlast fear. And in doing so, he underestimated the weight of the moment that was coming. Later that same night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus asked Peter to watch and pray. Not to fight, not to speak, just to pray. And Peter fell asleep. The man who promised unwavering loyalty could not stay spiritually alert for 1 hour. This was not a minor detail, it was a warning sign. Spiritual failure rarely begins in public. It begins in private neglect. Self-confidence without prayer creates an illusion of strength. It feels powerful until it is tested. Peter did not lack love for Jesus. He lacked dependence on God. And when the pressure came, Love alone was not enough to hold him steady. This speaks directly to us. Many believers are sincere, passionate, and well-meaning, yet spiritually vulnerable. We say the right things, believe the right doctrines, and intend to stand firm. But when prayer becomes optional, confidence quietly shifts from God to self. Peter's fall did not begin in the courtyard. It began when he trusted himself more than he trusted the need to stay connected to God. The tragedy is not that Peter was weak. The tragedy is that he didn't know how weak he was. And that unrecognized weakness was about to bring him face to face with his deepest failure. Number 3, Gethsemane. When spiritual sleep leads to spiritual collapse, the Garden of Gethsemane is quiet, heavy, and full of sorrow. Jesus knows the cross is hours away. The weight of what is coming presses down on him so deeply that he asks his closest friends to stay awake and pray with him. Peter is there. This is his moment to stand, not with words but with presence. And yet he sleeps. This is not simple physical tiredness. It is spiritual dullness. Jesus warns them plainly. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Peter's heart wants to be faithful, but his inner life is not anchored deeply enough to sustain him. He had promised loyalty, but he had not cultivated watchfulness. What happens in Gethsemane is easy to overlook, but it explains everything that follows. Before Peter denies Jesus with his mouth, he disconnects with his spirit. Prayer is not just preparation for ministry. It is preparation for pressure. When prayer fades, awareness fades. When awareness fades, reaction replaces discernment. Peter wakes up only when danger arrives. He reaches for a sword and lashes out, cutting off a man's ear. This is the same pattern we often follow. When we fail to pray, we compensate with action. We confuse emotional reaction for spiritual strength. Peter was willing to fight, but he was not ready to endure. Jesus immediately corrects him. This is not the way. Peter wanted a Messiah who would conquer through force, not surrender through suffering. And in that moment, Peter realizes something terrifying. The path Jesus is choosing is not the path Peter prepared himself for. Courage in battle is one thing. Faith under arrest is another. Gethsemane teaches us that spiritual collapse rarely happens suddenly. It is the result of small moments where prayer was postponed, where alertness was lost, where dependence quietly weakened. Peter did not fall asleep once. He fell asleep repeatedly. And by the time Jesus is taken away, Peter is awake physically but unprepared spiritually. If you have ever wondered how someone sincere can fall so hard, look at the garden. Spiritual sleep makes strong people fragile. It dulls discernment and magnifies fear. Peter walked into the night with good intentions, but without spiritual strength, and the night exposed what sleep had hidden. Number 4, the courtyard. Fear, pressure, and the first denial. After Jesus is arrested, Peter follows at a distance. That detail matters. He does not leave completely, but he no longer walks closely. Fear has entered the space where confidence once lived. Peter wants to see how things turn out, but he is no longer certain he wants to be seen with Jesus. The courtyard is cold, both in temperature and in spirit. Peter stands among strangers, warming himself by a fire that does not belong to him. He is surrounded by voices that are hostile, suspicious, and dangerous. This is not a dramatic confrontation. It is subtle. A servant girl looks at him and asks a simple question. "You were with him, weren't you?" Peter denies it. The first denial is quiet, almost reflexive. No shouting, no anger, just distance. "I don't know what you're talking about." This is how denial often begins, not with hatred for Jesus, but with self-preservation. Fear whispers that silence is safer than truth. Distance feels wiser than loyalty. What makes this moment devastating is that Peter is not under threat of execution. He is not being beaten or interrogated. He is simply uncomfortable. The pressure is social, not violent. And yet that is enough. Fear does not always need force. Sometimes it only needs exposure. Standing by that fire. Peter is trying to blend in, but faith was never meant to blend in. The more Peter stays in that space, the more denial becomes easier. One small compromise opens the door for the next. The farther he stands from Jesus, the easier it becomes to say, "I don't belong to him." This is a warning written in flesh and fire. Following Jesus at a distance always leads to confusion of identity. When we choose proximity to comfort over proximity to Christ, our convictions begin to soften. Peter still loves Jesus, but in that courtyard, fear is louder than love. The tragedy of the first denial is not just that it happened, but that it felt necessary to Peter. In that moment, fear convinced him that denial was survival. And once fear takes that role, it will demand more than silence. It will ask for separation, and soon it will ask for a complete disowning of truth. Number 4. The courtyard. Fear that rewrites identity. The longer Peter stays in the courtyard, the more dangerous the atmosphere becomes. Fear does not remain static. It grows. What began as a quiet attempt to stay unnoticed slowly turns into a crisis of identity. Another voice speaks up, sharper this time, more confident. "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." This is no longer a casual question. It is a challenge. And Peter feels the walls closing in. In that moment, the cost of association feels heavier than the cost of denial. So he pushes back harder. He denies again, this time with more force. Distance is no longer enough. Separation is required. Something important happens here. Peter is no longer just denying proximity to Jesus. He is denying belonging. The words coming out of his mouth are reshaping how he sees himself. Fear has moved from external pressure to internal confusion. He is no longer asking, "What will happen if they know?" He is now asking, "Who am I if I admit this?" This is how fear works. It doesn't only threaten safety, it attacks identity. It convinces you that survival requires erasing parts of who you are. Peter is still physically near the events, but spiritually he is drifting farther away. The fire that warms his body is freezing his conscience. And yet, Peter stays. He doesn't run. He doesn't leave the courtyard. Part of him still wants to be close. This inner conflict makes the moment even more painful. He is divided within himself. Love pulling one way, fear pulling the other. And fear is winning. The second denial hardens the path toward the third. Every time truth is suppressed, it becomes easier to suppress again. Peter is no longer just responding. He is defending his denial. And when fear becomes something you defend, it will eventually demand a final decisive break. Number 5. The rooster crows. When failure becomes impossible to ignore, the third accusation comes quickly, almost inevitably. Someone recognizes him, presses the issue, insists. This time, Peter does not hesitate. He denies Jesus again more aggressively, more desperately. The words come out stronger than before, as if volume could drown out conviction. And then it happens. The rooster crows. Sound has a way of cutting through chaos. That crow is not loud, but it is unmistakable. In an instant, everything Jesus said floods back into Peter's mind. The warning, the certainty, the love behind the warning. And then comes the look. Jesus turns and looks at Peter. There are no recorded words exchanged in that moment, because none are needed. That look carries everything. Truth without condemnation, sorrow without rejection, love without compromise. Peter sees himself clearly for the first time that night, not as the brave disciple he imagined, but as a frightened man who chose safety over faithfulness. And Peter breaks. The Bible says he wept bitterly, not quietly, not politely, bitterly. These are not tears of embarrassment. They are the tears of someone who realizes he betrayed the very relationship that defined him. This is the moment where failure becomes personal. No excuses remain. No rationalizations survive. Only truth. But even here, grace is already at work. Peter's tears are not the tears of despair. They are the tears of repentance. He does not harden his heart. He does not blame circumstances. He does not accuse God. He leaves and weeps. That matters more than we realize. Many people deny Jesus and feel nothing. Some Peter denies Jesus and feels everything. His pain is evidence that his heart is still alive. The crowing of the rooster is not just a signal of failure. It is a call to awakening. It marks the end of Peter's illusion of strength and the beginning of honest humility. This is the lowest point of Peter's story. And strangely, it is also the most hopeful, because when self-confidence dies, space is finally made for grace. Number 6. After the resurrection, grace that refuses to stay distant. After the crucifixion, Peter disappears from the center of the story. He is present, but quiet. The bold voice that once filled every moment is gone. Resurrection morning comes, and the tomb is empty. But Peter does not rush forward with confidence. He runs, yes, but he runs with questions, not certainty. Hope is there, but it is fragile. What is remarkable is not just that Jesus rose from the dead, but that he made sure Peter was not forgotten. The message given to the women at the tomb includes a specific instruction. Tell the disciples and Peter that name matters. It is not accidental. It is intentional grace. Jesus knows Peter's heart is heavy with failure, and he reaches for him first. Still, Peter does not immediately return to leadership. He goes back to fishing. This is not ambition. It is retreat. He returns to what is familiar, because he no longer trusts himself with what is sacred. Many people do this after failure. They don't stop believing in God, but they stop believing God can still use them. Then Jesus comes to the shore. No thunder, no public correction, just breakfast by the sea. Jesus meets Peter in the ordinary, not the dramatic. And then he asks a simple question. Do you love me? He asks it once, then again, then a third time. Each question reaches back to a denial, not to shame Peter, but to heal him. Jesus does not ask Peter to explain himself. He does not replay the failure. He does not demand an apology. He gives Peter a chance to affirm love where fear once spoke. With every answer, Jesus entrusts him again. Feed my sheep. Care for my people. Lead. This is what grace looks like. It does not erase the past. It redeems it. Jesus does not lower the standard for Peter. He raises the calling. The same man who denied him is now commissioned to shepherd others. Failure did not remove responsibility. Grace restored it. Number 7. From denial to boldness. What the Spirit builds from brokenness. Peter's story does not end at the shoreline. It accelerates. The same man who trembled before a servant girl now stands before crowds and speaks with authority. At Pentecost, Peter preaches openly about Jesus, crucified and risen. There is no hesitation, no distancing, no denial. Fear no longer controls him. What changed was not Peter's personality. It was his foundation. Confidence, rooted in self, had been replaced with dependence on the Spirit. Peter no longer trusted his own courage. He trusted God's presence within him, and that made all the difference. Peter still had flaws. He was still human, but he was no longer pretending to be strong. He had learned what failure taught him, that strength is born out of surrender. The man who once collapsed under pressure now endured persecution, imprisonment, and eventually death without denying Christ again. Tradition tells us Peter was crucified, but upside down, because he did not consider himself worthy to die the same way as Jesus. Whether every detail is exact or not, the truth remains. Peter never denied Jesus again. Not when it cost comfort. Not when it cost freedom. Not when it cost his life. This is the power of restoration. God does not just forgive. He transforms. He takes broken confidence and replaces it with holy courage. He takes a failure and turns it into a testimony that strengthens others. Peter's story stands as proof that your worst moment does not define your future. God does not abandon people because they fall. He redeems them when they return. And when grace finishes its work, the very place where you failed can become the place where you stand the strongest. Conclusion. Peter's story ends where many of us are still standing between memory and hope. The memory of what went wrong and the hope that somehow it is not over. His denial was real, it was public, it was painful. And yet it was not the final word spoken over his life. Grace spoke louder. What Peter learned, and what we must learn, is that failure does not disqualify love. Jesus did not love Peter less because Peter fell. He did not keep his distance or lower his expectations. He stepped closer. He called Peter by name. He trusted him again, not because Peter proved himself, but because grace had finished its work. Some of you carry a rooster in your memory, a moment when everything you believed about yourself collapsed, a moment when fear won, a moment when you walked away ashamed, convinced you had gone too far. Peter stands as living proof that Jesus already knew that moment before it happened, and still chose you. The gospel is not the story of perfect people who never fail. It is the story of a faithful God who restores those who return. Peter was not remembered for his denial. He was remembered for his obedience after restoration. His greatest weakness became the place where God revealed his greatest strength. If you are willing to return, Jesus is willing to restore. Not halfway, not cautiously, fully. He still asks the same question, not to accuse but to heal. Do you love me? Your answer does not need to be loud. It does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be honest. Because the story does not end with your failure. It ends with grace, and grace always has the final word.